Well, hello, I'm Dr. Matt Bracewell with Piedmont International University. I'm here to talk to you about Chapter 4 of our textbook from LEA 814, Teacher Supervision and Evaluation. Now, of course, this textbook, which I have right here with me as I'm talking to you, I'm going to be referencing it to discuss with you some important concepts as you move forward. Work on your essay for this week. Conduct your interview, which is found in the appendix in the back of your textbook, and work towards your final paper, which will be due in week 7. Now in Chapter 4, name of this chapter is Build Standards-Based Systems of Local Evaluation. Now up until this point, you should be understanding the importance of building community around teachers. I mean, we've all been in a classroom at some point, and teachers really need support. Even if you're not in the education field, people in their jobs need support. And of course, professional development. We think about communities that are based around trying to improve each person in that group. They all look different in specific entities, but they all do the same thing. They offer support to try to improve the overall worker's performance. And in education, it's extremely important because our job is to educate the future. Now, I've made a few notes in my book, so I'll be referencing a few things that I highlighted and just try to think, and I just try to encourage you to think about some different things from the chapter to try to help you as you proceed forward in your journey. In Chapter 4, some very important points are made from the very beginning. We look at a study based at South Valley Academy in New Mexico, where an evaluation system was put into place to measure the effectiveness of teachers as they reiterated the different concepts and the different teaching strategies that they learned at their different professional development activities and workshops. Some important points from the very beginning encourage 3 main things. 1, developing a standards-based evaluation of practice. Number 2, evidence of teacher contributions to student learning. And then 3, evidence of teachers' contributions to the work of their colleagues and the system as a whole. Now, this is referred to on a 3-tiered scale here. 3 main factors that encourage all teachers to build around in this particular method. It's called the Triangulated Standards-Based Evaluation Framework. And if you look on page 51 of your text, you notice that there's 3 main points that this emphasizes. You have measures of student learning and outcomes, which are going to directly affect and be affected by the evidence of professional contributions, which are going to impact the judgments about the practitioner or the teacher who is improving themselves. And this is also going to validate the judgment about the practice as far as what works and what does not. All of these things are connected. Therefore, this triangulated method is what's emphasized. Now, some things to think about. All of the research in education over the last 20 to 25 years shows that frequent skilled use of standards-based observation is the most effective in terms of achieving student gains. Now, one thing that we think about is how do we improve in our own practice? What makes us better? A lot of the time we think it's building on our strengths, when in actuality, a lot of the time as human beings, we don't like to hear negative feedback, negative commentary. And that's one thing that the research shows continually, that teachers and workers in any field need to hear more of, or the things that they can improve in. Not just a simple, good job, or great point, wonderful lesson, but to really highlight the areas that still need a little bit more fine-tuning and a little bit more focus as we try to reach all students in our classrooms, or all workers that we're managers over in a different field that's non-education related. Teachers hearing consistent feedback is always going to be the best approach in trying to reach every possible student or every possible worker in a workplace. Teachers each year set their own goals by their administrators, and this is extremely important in a non-education field. Setting your own goals. If you're the manager of a major plant producing textile, non-woven fabrics, it's extremely important to have an idea of what you did last year, the areas that went well, the things that you know you can improve on. And this always involves consistent evaluation of those that we oversee, that we supervise or manage. Now on pages 54 and 55 is the standards-based evaluation from San Mateo, California, that was based on the California standards of the teaching profession. And of course you can see here that there's 6 basic areas that each teacher was asked to follow in terms of their teaching and in which they would be evaluated upon. Each standard contains 5 subcategories, and of course these levels rank from unsatisfactory to exemplary. Now each state does their own thing, but essentially everything revolves around not doing the job to recognizing distinguishable, or in this case, exemplary marks. Every teacher wants to strive for that exemplary mark. I mean, we all want to be excellent in our craft. People who work in fields that do not involve teaching students directly, maybe it's overseeing workers or overseeing different managers, they want to do the best job that they can. They want to be recognized based on their accomplishments. Sometimes that involves changing the culture. Going in, sometimes taking a situation that's not ideal and making it something that, of course, is above and beyond what we ever could have dreamed for it to be. Now, on page 56, it says that in standards-based evaluation systems, researchers found that teachers' ratings were related to effectiveness with students, and teachers' effectiveness improved as they worked within the system. So the direct communication between a teacher and a student, an administrator and a teacher, a manager and a worker, is all about consistently having standards to base that upon. We don't like to see that we're not making the mark, that we're missing the mark in some areas. We don't like to hear those negative comments. But the truth is, we all have areas in which we can improve. The fact is, professional responsibility is something that should be ingrained automatically in anyone, in any profession, is being responsible for ourselves, not just on the job, not just being moral and ethical, but continuing to build ourselves professionally. Each state, when we talk about education, has their own evaluation systems. In Georgia, they have TEKS. In North Carolina, they have EBOS. In other states, they have other acronyms. But we continue as teachers, we need to continue to have the evaluation given to us in a productive and timely manner. One of the most important aspects that has been undertaken over the last several years is the development of administrators spending more time in longer conference periods before, during, and after with teachers, whether they're first-year teachers, veteran teachers, or people who are just simply coming over from a different occupation. It's extremely important to set the goals, to meet those goals, and if goals are not accomplished, develop a plan in order to meet those goals and hit the mark the next time. As I was going through my undergraduate studies, I had a literature professor that told me one of the greatest things that you can do when writing a paper is to consider 3 things. Tell the reader what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of telling, but the truth is, when we're setting up evaluation methods with people, with coworkers, people who are directly subordinate to us in a manager-worker situation, we need to remember that it's extremely important that goals and expectations are clear. So when you sit down and you talk with someone, whether it's an evaluation procedure or whether it's just discussing a lesson, is to be very clear about what the expectation is in terms of what the goals would be. Now, one important thing to remember is that as educators, or as just adults in general, we never stop learning. And that's an important thing to remember, because I believe as professional educators, it's really easy to get this mindset that we've arrived or that we've learned all we can learn. But we need to constantly be improving ourselves. To remember that schools are an important learning organization for young people, but they're equally as important to parents, to all community stakeholders, teachers, administrators, and people of all educational levels, people outside of the education field. Peer learning is one of the most important things that you can keep in mind when talking about evaluation methods. I heard a study one time that said students or young people remember 88% of what their peers say, what they tell them, whether it's informal conversations, peer tutoring. Almost 90% of what young people hear from their peers, they remember, they can recall, and it's meaningful to them. A study from this text on page 60, I thought was not surprising, where it said 90% of the nation's teachers report that their colleagues contribute to the teaching effectiveness of their craft. So when you think about that, professional learning communities is an idea that has been around for quite some time, has completely overtaken middle school teaching methods as we've gone from junior highs in most places to the middle school model, where there's more team teaching, where you have people of each subject, including exceptional needs teachers, all working together to develop plans where they can address all students' needs. Another thing to remember is it's very important for teachers to support one another regardless of what level that he or she may be at. If a teacher is demonstrating exemplary marks or distinguishable marks that are excellent and above all their peers, that teacher should not be an island left unto themselves. They should be going out, observing other teachers, having just general conversations with young teachers, first-year teachers, people who are coming over from a new district, a new school, a new subject. Just having these genuine conversations with one another to help build a very supportive rapport amongst their teachers. Common planning is something that a lot of teachers have begun to emphasize as a need in their schools because of the fact that grade levels, subject areas need to understand where each other are, what they're doing, and be able to be there to support one another. Some school districts and some states have even made greater efforts to evaluate their teachers and compensate them based on improvement, either in the classroom by the students or the teachers themselves. Now, merit-based pay based on student scores is something that most states have highly discouraged, yet is still a topic amongst a lot of people that come over from business-related fields and even newer teachers who have a mindset of using test scores from students to try to decide what teachers should make, merit-based pay. But the approach from the textbook is more of a knowledge and skills-based compensation system, which is a completely different thought concept, comes from the private sector, and really encourages workers to develop new and more complex or employer-specific skills. In other words, developing strategies to improve not just your student test scores, but yourself as a professional, and also the community as a whole. Student involvement, student engagement, which of course is always going to motivate and encourage student achievement. Some states offer stipends or pay increases for national board certification, Rhode Island, North Carolina, amongst many other states. And of course, some states such as Colorado and Georgia encourage teachers to pursue higher education, higher degrees, in order to compensate them for that. Schools also need to remember to encourage teachers to share those practices, as we previously mentioned, but especially ones that have a positive impact on student achievement. Not just someone who is wonderful at teaching, not someone who is just meeting the standards of their evaluation system, but someone who is proven to be able to reach students, to be able to help them to achieve and attain higher levels. Because we have to remember, we're all working together. We're all a team. Now, evidence of student learning is something that is continually emphasized, and it's the third critical leg of this study, or this model that we're talking about in Chapter 4. Students need to understand how what they're learning is connected to the real world, how it's going to make them a better person, how it's going to make them a better student. Why is it real to them? And a lot of the time this comes from just simply collecting data based on reflection that the student or students will give the teacher or the administrators. We have to always remember that students are curious about the subject that they're learning, but they might not necessarily be as interested in the overall impact that it has, just like us as teachers sometimes, or as professionals. We take classes or have to be in workshops where we may not see the overall impact, but it does help us to grow in some way or another, maybe to continue in that field, or maybe to change our minds completely and go a completely different route. Once teachers identify areas that they want to work on as far as improving student achievement, they can continue to collect more focused evidence of student learning. And as you continue throughout this course and you conduct your interviews next week, that is one important thing to think about as you talk with your teacher, professional, educator, specialist in some way, is to think about the different ways that student achievement is gained and is shown at a very high level. Evidence of student learning is combined with other evidence from standards-based teaching evaluations conducted through classroom observation and evidence of the teacher's skills or practices. Professional development is so important in understanding how to evaluate not only our students in the classroom or our workers in a business, but also, most importantly, ourselves, so that we can improve the quality of our work. In conclusion, something to consider is that when we have a greater awareness of what's going on in the classroom, when we think about the things that we're strong in but we're also weak in, we have to make sure that immediate intervention is taken. We always understand by reflecting upon student work what they did well in, what they did poorly in, what needs more remediation, what needs more improvement. Or in some cases, students need to be challenged more. Maybe it's a student with gifted tendencies. The overall importance is whether you're in a classroom or whether you're in a business setting, is being able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the workers that are involved, understanding how people can all communicate with one another when they know how to, when they have the encouragement is given from management above to be able to build this community where everyone's learning, everyone's listening. So no matter whether you're in education or not, it's extremely important to remember that every single person can contribute in some way. And being able to sometimes give people bad news in terms of their evaluation. I mean, we do that for students all the time, or for our children, or for people that work for us. Sometimes we have to do that and try to encourage them to improve in a way that's productive and is continuing to exhort them and to build them up in that way. So as you move on to Chapter 5 and as you look at your appendix and you start to really consider this interview process with this educator, consider thinking about the standards-based approach where you're not only evaluating the people that are in your line of fire, so to speak, but looking back in that mirror, that reflective practitioner approach where we can improve in the areas that we're weak in. Continuing to grow, continuing to find professional development that improves our teaching ability, a community where we can be supported and also be supportive of one another